Welcome to the 2019 edition of my SkyGuider Pro full tutorial. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how the SkyGuider Pro actually works, how to set things up properly, whether you're using a wide angle or telephoto lens. We're going to look at how to balance things and a whole lot more. So if you've just gotten your SkyGuider Pro, or if you've had it for a while and you're still kind of confused how it works, this video should clear everything up. First, let's cover the basics of the tracker. And to be clear, the star tracker itself is just this red piece here. It's pretty lightweight, maybe a little over a pound. All metal, well, mostly metal. There's some plastic on here. It's got a really nice build quality though, and compared to all the other star trackers, this is my favorite design. And on the front here, we have one of our most important pieces, this black part with the little notches. That is the clutch, and this is something you're going to be using all the time. The way this works is you're going to turn it counterclockwise to loosen it, and then clockwise to tighten it down. The reason you would loosen it is to rotate your camera and other things around, but once it's loose, you can rotate also this red piece independently. And what I want you to do if you've just gotten your SkyGuider Pro is take off the front cap, unscrew the back cap, and you'll see the polar scope here. If you look through the polar scope, you should see a reticle inside of there. And what you need to do, especially when you got on location, is get that pointing up like a clock with 12 at the top, 6 at the bottom. The way you do that is using, again, this clutch, this black knobs. You're going to turn it counterclockwise to loosen it, look through the scope, and then rotate the red piece on the front, and you'll notice the reticle rotates around as well. Once you've got it with 12 at the top, 6 at the bottom, you can tighten down the clutch, and you're ready to go to do your polar alignment, which we'll talk about. One other thing, when you look through the polar scope and you point it out a window, you'll probably notice that everything is upside down. That's okay, that's the way it's supposed to look. And if you get more into telescopes, you'll run into this quite often. Pretty much everything is inverted. So nothing to worry about there. But once you've gotten the reticle with 12 at the top, 6 at the bottom, I recommend turning on the star tracker so you can see the red lights. And now look through the polar scope again. You should see a red light that illuminates the reticle. If you don't see it, it's probably because you're doing it in the daylight like I am. So you can either put your lens over or your hand over the front, or just go in a very dark room and look through there. But you should see a red light. That's really important to do there. And it should only turn on when that reticle is lined up with 12 at the bottom, 6 at the top. If it's off to the side and it's not straight up and down, that red light might not turn on. So bear that in mind. It's only going to turn on at a certain location. That's something else I've seen screw a lot of people up, especially beginners. That's just a quick look at the polar scope in the SkyGuider Pro. We're going to get into that more later and how to do a polar alignment. But next, let's talk about the different buttons and the inputs here on the SkyGuider Pro, because those are pretty simple to use. Right here on the back, or rather on the top I guess, we have 3 buttons, a left and right arrow and a center button. These control pretty much the major things you need to worry about here on the SkyGuider Pro. Once you turn on the star tracker, you'll see a red light, and there should be a red light under the 1X. Those are our different tracking speeds. So we have 1X, we've got solar, lunar, and then half X. From almost everybody, just leave it at 1X unless you are photographing, let's say, the solar eclipse, or if you want to photograph the moon, then you would change it to the other speeds. The half X though, that's pretty much useless as far as I'm concerned. It's going to allow you to shoot a little bit longer and have a reasonably sharp foreground and reasonably sharp stars. But in almost every case, you're better off just leaving it on 1X unless you need to change it. And again, the way you would change that, you just press the center button repeatedly to go from one tracking speed to the other. But everybody, I'd recommend leave it on 1X to start. If you're in the southern hemisphere, you'll need to change that here. And the way you're going to do that is if you hold down the center button for a half second, you should now see a red light flashing under the S. Once that's flashing, you can press the center button once, the flashing will stop. Press it one more time, now there will be a red light that's static under the S. That means you're in the southern hemisphere. If that's good for you, you can hold down the center button for another half second and continue on. But if you're in the northern hemisphere, you want to make sure that there's no red light under the S. So you would just press the center button one more time to turn off the red light. Once there's no more red light, you'll hold down the center button for a half second. Now we're on the red light brightness. This can really come in handy at night. So the way you want to do this is go into a dark room or wait till you're out at night ready to shoot, and use your left and right arrows to make that red light brighter or dimmer. Remember, you're only going to see that red light when you have 12 at the top, 6 at the bottom on the reticle. If the reticle is crooked, you won't see the red light turn on, so bear that in mind. Once you've gotten the brightness good, you can hold down the center button one more time for a half second. Now you're back on the tracking speeds. Very simply, you just hold it down for half a second, you swap between the 3 different options here on the SkyGuider Pro. Not too much to worry about there. You really shouldn't have to worry about any of that, to be honest. But those are the buttons. On the back, we have our different inputs. Starting on the right, we have HBX. This is for the optional hand controller, which I don't recommend buying if you don't already have it. If you do have it and you just bought it, you might actually want to return it because it's really not good for much at all. There's a few minor functions you can do with it, but it's not going to give you like go-to functionality where you can just type in something and it'll move everything for you. It really has minimal uses, so I never bought one. I don't really recommend you buy one if you're thinking about buying it. That's what the HBX port is, though, is for that hand controller. The next over, we have USB. This is going to charge the SkyGuider Pro, and that leads us into the battery. The battery on here should last you at least 20 hours of straight runtime. I've only encountered a low battery once in the last 2 years or so, which goes to show just how well this thing works. Now, there are some warnings when you're charging the battery. First, I recommend just charging on your laptop or something so you can sit there and watch it, but you're never going to have any idea that it's actually finished charging until you turn the tracker on. So whenever I'm charging the SkyGuider Pro here, I always have it turned on, and you'll see the red light there. As soon as that red light starts flashing rapidly, you know the battery's fully charged. You can turn off the tracker and pull out the cable. One problem I had, though, is I was actually out in the field and that light was rapidly flashing and I couldn't figure out why because nothing was connected. And it turns out you can actually apparently overcharge the battery, which you don't want to do. So again, in order to avoid that, leave the tracker turned on while you're charging it. Keep an eye on things. Don't let it run all night, being plugged in. And as soon as you see that flashing bright light, you can unplug it and know your battery's charged. That's how you'll charge the SkyGuider Pro. You can also, I think, run it even if the battery has died. If you can just plug it into a power source, it should still run. But like I said, I haven't had any issues with the battery in 2 years. That's where the USB input is for. We also have a little 3.5mm jack. That's going to be for a snap cable. That has almost no use or function with the SkyGuider Pro, especially if you don't have that hand control we just mentioned. So don't really worry about that one too much. The most important port on here is the guiding, and this kind of looks like the phone cable. This is a huge thing that I recently got into, and I wish I would have done it sooner. Very simply, an auto guider will increase the effectiveness of the tracking on your SkyGuider Pro immensely. For example, when I was shooting with my 150 to 600mm lens without the auto guider, this star tracker can usually get about 30 seconds at 600mm. But when I use an auto guider, I can comfortably shoot 4 minutes and still have sharp stars. That's a huge increase in accuracy, and I really recommend, if you're going to be doing deep space astrophotography with this, get an auto guider. I have a full video here on YouTube if you want to learn more, or on my website you can go and read more about that. I'll have one of the pop-ups in the corner right now if you want to learn more, but I highly recommend looking into auto guiders. It's made a massive difference for my own photography, and I wish I would have done something about it sooner. And as far as I'm aware, there's nobody else even talking about auto guiding on a SkyGuider Pro. So really look into that. We don't really have time to get into that in today's video, but that's the basics of the SkyGuider Pro. Next, we're going to look at how to do a rough polar alignment, how to attach things properly, whether you're using a wide angle or telephoto lens, and then how to set up your declination bracket and some other things. The first thing we always want to do when we get out on location with our star tracker is find north. This is going to be the point where all of the stars rotate around. And it's very simple to find north, actually. First, you need to find the Big Dipper. This is the easiest constellation to find regardless of where you're at. Once you found the Big Dipper, we're going to take this corner star here, draw a straight line out from it, and that's always going to take us directly to the North Star. Now, be warned, the Big Dipper rotates in a counterclockwise motion in the sky throughout the night and also throughout the year. So the position of the stars might not quite be what you're used to seeing, but the Big Dipper is always there, and you're always going to take that same corner star, draw a straight line out, and that'll bring you right to the North Star. Once you've found the North Star, or Polaris, we can point this up to that spot in the sky. And this is really important to understand. What we're actually doing, if you look here at this video of the star trails, is we're trying to point the star tracker up to that exact specific spot where all the stars rotate around. That way, when we turn on the tracker, our camera will follow the motion of the stars. That's really all we're doing. And it's pretty simple to do, actually. So once you've found the North Star, you want to take your tripod with the tracker attached, and I usually just reposition the tripod crouch down over the top, and I want to make sure that the North Star is centered up over the top of the tracker. That's the easiest way to do a rough alignment. Once you get that done, then you can look through the polar scope and see if you can even see the North Star somewhere in there. And whenever I'm teaching somebody, that tends to be the hardest step, is finding the North Star in that polar scope. Especially if you're a beginner, it can be a little bit overwhelming. That's why I recommend you, if you go out during twilight when there aren't that many stars, that might make things easier for you. Only see the brightest stars when you look through there. Once you've found the North Star and you've at least got it centered up over the tracker, that's honestly good enough for shooting like 4 minutes at 14 millimeters. If you want to be more precise though, you're going to need an application. And I personally use an app on Android called Polar Align. This works okay. You can also use an app called the Star Adventure Mini Console app. This is a free download, and the reticle's not going to quite match what we see here in the SkyGuider Pro, but it's close enough to get a decent polar alignment. Whichever app you use, you always need to find your latitude first. And if you get the Star Adventure Mini Console or the SAM app, we can go in there, click on the Polar Clock utility, then click on Location in the upper right. Once you've done that, it should tell you your current latitude and longitude. Once you know your latitude, we're actually going to dial that in here right on the base. So in this case, I'm at about 38 degrees north. I can just turn this knob here on the back. See how that's making the star tracker kind of level out now? Or I can angle it up higher in the sky. But again, all you're trying to do is get the numbers to line up with your current latitude. That's really critical there. You don't have to be overly precise, but try and get as close as you can. At that point, the star tracker should be angled up to that same spot in the sky where all the stars rotate around, which is right next to the North Star. And provided you have it centered over the top of the tracker, you're pretty much done if you're doing a wide angle lens. Again, if you're going to be using a telephoto lens, you'll have to look through the polar scope and do some more precise adjustments. And that brings me next to the leveling base here. And this base has a lot of names. It's called a wedge, an alt-az base, a latitude base. So don't get confused if you see all these different names. Usually what they're referring to is just this piece here. And the reason they call it that is we have basically two ways to adjust it. We have azimuth, that's 2 screws here on the front. If we turn them both in the same direction at the same time, that's going to move the star tracker left or right. Again, that's our azimuth adjustment screws. And we're turning both screws in the same direction at the same time. Our altitude is the big knob on the back. And if you turn that one, it's going to move the star tracker either higher up or down. That's our altitude. And between our altitude and azimuth adjustments, we can get the North Star position precisely in that polar scope. And what you would want to do when you get out there is just crouch down, look through the scope, and see where the North Star is at, and then use these screws to get it closer to the center of the reticle. And if you got that Polar Finder app or the Star Adventure Mini Console app, they're both going to show a little dot where the North Star should be. Once you know where the North Star should be, you just do your adjustments and get it kind of close to there, and that's how you do a more precise polar alignment. However, if you're having a lot of trouble with this, again, if you go for that auto guider, it's going to cost you about another $250, if not a little bit more. You won't really ever have to screw around with this again because you're going to be using your laptop for the auto guider. You'll just look down at the laptop. It'll actually tell you, move the tracker up 5 degrees and move it to the right 3 degrees, something like that. And that's going to make things a lot easier, believe it or not. Rather than trying to crane your neck, look through the polar scope, see if you can even see the star. You might not even be looking at the North Star. So actually, for some beginners, you might want to check out the auto guider right out of the gate. But that's how you do a polar alignment. If you want to learn more, I'd recommend you check out my SkyGuider Pro full course, which has over 15 hours of tutorials. We really delve more into this, but I've covered the basics today just to get you started, which should work fine for a wide angle lens. Again, the big thing is just to point this up towards the North Star, really lock down the tripod. If you move the tripod at all, you'll have to redo your polar alignment. And once this thing is pointed up towards the North Star and it's turned on, your camera's going to follow the motion of the stars, and that's what's going to allow you to shoot longer than about 20 or 30 seconds and still have sharp images. Next, we're going to look at various ways to mount your camera to the SkyGuider Pro, and this is probably the most important part of this video because even myself, I've kind of revised my techniques a lot over the past 2 years, and I definitely have a recommended way of doing things that really will help you out. Now, the first way you can mount things is just pretty simply the way it comes from the factory. When you get your SkyGuider Pro and open it out of the box, it's going to come something like this, where we have a little mount here on the front, and this mount you can just attach a ball head to. So I can grab my ball head here, and I would screw it in here, and then from there I'd attach the camera, and I could start shooting. However, if you've got a pretty heavy camera and lens, this really won't work all that well. Just to show you, I've got a pretty big and beefy Nikon 14-24 here with just a little demo camera. Doesn't weigh much at all. But when I attach this on here, like so, I can now angle the ball head and reach any position in the sky, north, south, east, west, whatever, and then turn on the tracker and start shooting. That's going to work fine if you've got a setup weighing 3 pounds or less generally. You could probably push it to 4 pounds, but the reason you want to have a light weight is because you're putting a lot of stress here on the mount. And if you've got a full frame camera with a big lens like this, or a telephoto lens, you do not want to go this route. It's only going to cause you problems, and you're not going to be able to get very long exposures at all. But if you've got like a Sony mirrorless or Fuji mirrorless, something like that, this method should work okay. For everybody else, you're going to want to use what's called the declination bracket. And I'm going to grab that here next. And that's really the most confusing part of the SkyGuider Pro. That's where everybody gets lost out, myself included, when I first got my tracker. This is the declination bracket here. It's actually just this piece, and then down here we have the counterweight rod and the actual counterweight. Now when you get yours straight from the factory, it's not going to quite look like this. What you'll probably have is, in fact, everything's going to be almost flipped around. And that's one of the confusing parts, is that iOptron never really specifies how to set this up or why you would change things. And that's something I had to spend a lot of time just testing on my own. And just to show you, when you get your declination bracket, I'm going to cut to an earlier video now, and you'll see the way it should have looked, where we have a screw there at the top on the one piece. But that's the way it's going to look right from the factory. I recommend doing some adjustments. This is the way it should look straight from the factory. We've got a screw in from the top. We've got a little circular piece here on the bottom. And we have to do, honestly, quite a bit to even make this thing functional for our needs. And the first thing I would do is just remove the screw here from the top if it came in like that. And you don't want to lose this screw. This is going to be one of our most important screws here. We're going to be using it for a variety of different configuration options. So put that somewhere where you won't lose it, the big screw there. And now we have, again, our declination bracket here. I want you to see, though, that one end is considerably longer than the other end. See how much longer that is? That's something you really need to keep in mind, because we're going to try to balance our camera and lens. And whatever side you attach it to is really going to come and cause you some problems down the road, because by default, they have your camera mounted up top here with a counterweight extending down. And if your camera's up on the high end here, it's a lot higher above the center of gravity down here. That's going to cause balancing issues. And this is something I see almost everybody runs into. So the first thing I actually did with my declination bracket here is swapped everything. So instead of the camera being on the long end here, it's going to be on the short end. There are some downsides to doing that, mainly the screw here. This is going to get in the way on occasion, so that's one thing you have to watch out for. But I would recommend almost everybody try this, or stick with this for now, see if you can balance your camera system. We'll talk about that later. But that's always the first thing you want to do, in my experience, is to pull off this circular camera mounting block here. You'll now have this other circular piece which it attaches to. We're going to take this out and put it on the short end up top. And you should have gotten a little Allen key. That'll allow you to unscrew everything here. You pick it up, put it down, and retighten it. Then from there, we'll continue on with the setup process. Once you've reconfigured your declination bracket, again, we have that circular piece mounted on the short end now, not the long end like it came from the factory. You're ready to continue on. And you want to grab the little camera mounting block. This should have come pre-installed here on the declination bracket. You can just pop it on right on the top there, tighten down these two screws, and there we go. From here you can mount a telephoto lens, or you can put a ball head on here and your camera. That tends to work the best. And again, since we have the camera on the short end, we can attach our counterweight on the long end and get more leverage. So you should have also gotten a counterweight rod and an actual counterweight. You want to screw that in here through the bottom, and then we'll go on from there. Once the counterweight rod has been attached, you can grab your counterweight. And the counterweight has pretty much two different sides actually. If you look through there, one should have a groove visible. If you look at it from the other end though, it should look completely flat in the center there. So see which side has the groove and position that facing downwards. That's just going to give you a little bit more leverage when we attach everything. So we can slide this up on the counterweight rod. You will have to take out that silver screw though, that's at the bottom. Make sure you also tighten this thing down so it doesn't fall out and smash your foot. And then once it's in there, you can take your little end piece and tighten that down. And this is the way your declination bracket should look to get good results. Again, we have the counterweight rod attached to the long end of the declination bracket with the circular camera mount here on the top. Once you've done all that, we can come back here to our tracker, turn everything so the little grooves match up, and we want the screw to be up top, just like that, and then we'll tighten this down. Once you've done that, honestly, that's one of the hardest parts right there. That really took me a while to figure out the best way to configure things. So hopefully that saved you a lot of hours as well. And then from here, what we would do, well, we really have two options. If we take off the camera mounting block up top here, by default, it's going to have a very small little screw. This will thread directly into the tripod collar on your lens or into the bottom of your camera. However, if you're going to be using a ball head and a wide angle lens, I do not recommend this piece. I mean, you could get an adapter so it would work. Instead, what you want to do is just unscrew it from the back, put it somewhere you won't lose it, and then grab that big screw that we got from the start of the video. Remember, this was kind of like inserted upside down here in the declination bracket. You want that big screw, and you can thread this up right through the bottom of your little camera mounting block here with the little Mickey Mouse ears screws. Once this has been installed through the center and it's really tight, from here you can install a ball head. And the reason you would do this is to allow you to reach any position in the sky with a wide angle lens. So now that I have the big thick screw in there, I'll reattach it. From here, I would grab my ball head, screw in the ball head, and put in my wide angle lens. So we're going to look at how to attach a wide angle and a telephoto lens for the best results next. But hopefully you've got everything set up like you see here. As you'll see, we're going to run into a few problems, but there are some workarounds. This isn't foolproof, but based on everything I've done, this is the best way to configure things. We are going to be jumping around here a little bit. What I did in the break there is I reattached that little tiny screw that we just removed from the camera mounting block because I want to show you how to do a telephoto lens first. So once you have that little screw, or maybe you never even took it out yet, on your camera mounting block, we'll grab our telephoto lens if you got it, and you should have a little screw hole in there on the tripod foot collar. What we'll do is we'll just screw it in like so. If you have a bracket or something on here, you might have to take that off for this to work properly. And there we go. Now I have the little circular mounting piece attached directly to the lens. That's what you want to do, because if you try and do this with a ball head, you're going to run into a lot of problems. Once this has been screwed directly into your telephoto lens, we can plop it down up top here like usual, tighten down the two screws, and this is going to give you the most stable and secure result. If you try and put a telephoto lens on a ball head, you're in for a world of problems because your center of gravity is going to be so high, you're never going to get it to balance with a single counterweight. In this case, we should be okay. And this will make more sense in a minute if you're kind of confused how we're even going to reach different portions of the sky. But once you've gotten your telephoto lens and camera attached directly to the declination bracket, no ball head in between, we can loosen the clutch. That's those black knobs on the front of the tracker. As soon as you do that, though, you always want to have a firm hand on this camera. I've seen too many horror stories sometimes with the camera slipping and sliding and coming loose. So whenever you're doing anything like this, you always have a firm hand on the camera. You never let go. And then turn everything horizontally. Might be kind of scary at first. When you do that, either the camera's going to pull down or the counterweight's going to pull down. In this case, you can see that the camera is pulling down. That means that the camera is too heavy. So the way I can fix that is just to lower the counterweight until neither side is pulling down. And this is honestly one of the most common questions I get is, how the heck do you balance this thing with one counterweight? And that's how you do it right there, is you attach the lens directly to that camera mounting piece on the declination bracket. And again, we're on the short end, not the long end. If you do everything properly, you should have no problems balancing even the heaviest lens with a single counterweight here. Now, with that in mind, I've taught a lot of people over the past, well, just about a year now, and a lot of the time they do need a second counterweight, especially if you're using big ball heads and wide angle lenses, which we'll cover next. So you can get these for about $25, these extra counterweights. If you have balancing problems, you'll definitely want to do that. But now you've seen how to attach a telephoto lens, let's talk about how you actually point it up to the right position in the sky. And very simply, we have two different axes that we can rotate around. The first is called our declination. That's if you loosen the two screws up here on the mount, moving the camera basically left and right. That's declination. And you'll see these words pop up a lot as you get more in astrophotography. So we've got our declination axis there. And then if you remember these black knobs here on the front of the SkyGuider Pro, if you turn those, again, counterclockwise to loosen it, this is going to be our right ascension, like that. So we've got our right ascension axis and our declination axis. Between those two, we can now reach any position in the night sky. And this will take some getting used to, but see how I can point it way up over here if I want to. There is one problem you're going to run into, though, if you did everything like this. And that is these two screws here on the mounting block are always going to come in contact with this screw on the back. And that'll cause you some headaches at night. It's manageable, though. What you could always do is, we have two screws here and we have a third hole. So if you're turning things and it gets caught and it hits the screw back here, just take the screw out and then put it in the third hole on the far side, like so. And then you'll be able to keep moving it around. It's a minor headache, but all things considered, it's something you just got to deal with. But now I can go further over. I can reach any position in the night sky I want to. Whenever you're doing this, though, always a firm hand on the camera and really tighten everything down once you think you've gotten the camera pointed where you want, because that'll cause you some scares if something comes loose at this stage. So let's say I'm photographing the Lagoon Nebula. I'm pointing off to that right direction. And one other tip, you have a tripod collar here, right? You can always loosen that and turn the camera so it's facing dead on. It's not some weird crooked angle and you have to break your back looking through there. So you can always do that just by loosening that. But that's how you'll do a telephoto lens. I know a lot of people seem to get confused there, but that's how you're going to do it. Pretty simple once you get the hang of it. So that's our telephoto lens setup. In the next part of the video, we're going to look at how to attach things properly if you have a ball head and get the most stable results that way. All right, now we're ready to attach a ball head and a wide angle lens to the declination bracket. And for this, you're going to need the same camera mounting block we've been using, but you want to replace that small screw that went directly into the lens with the big screw that was originally in here. So you should have that lying around somewhere, and all you have to do is just screw it in the back here after you remove the smaller screw. Once you have the big screw here attached, we can grab our ball head and just, it should go right into the ball head. I have had some people have trouble with this for whatever reason, so you might want to have a screwdriver nearby when you do it just to make sure it all goes in properly. But once this is nice and tight in there, we can just drop it down on the declination bracket, tighten the two side screws like so. And now we can reposition the ball head, grab our camera, and drop it down on there. This is my recommended way for using a ball head and a wide angle lens. And I do recommend, if you don't have one, getting a ball head. I've seen people try and use three-way heads and panning heads and things like that on here, and it just makes their life a lot more difficult at night. A ball head will make things much more simple. So at this point, I've got everything attached, but as always, we need to balance the counterweight first. And you really want to be careful at this stage, because it'll probably even happen to me while I'm recording this. The ball head tends to unscrew itself when you're balancing things, and that can cause a really bad situation. So at this point, really try and tighten down the ball head, make sure the panning knob is locked down, and have a firm hand on the camera. Do not let go of the camera. But we're going to loosen our clutch now on the SkyGuider. rotate everything horizontally, and we're going to move our counterweight in and out until everything is properly balanced. Neither side is pulling down, just like that. Now we can rotate it back up to the top, and we can position our lens wherever we want in the sky. It's really nice having the ball head functionality here. I can grab the Milky Way, I can shoot to the north, south, east, or west, lock it down, turn on the tracker, and start taking my photos. However, there's one thing you have to keep in mind. If I were to position the lens over here now, that's really going to throw off the balancing. So every time you really move the lens, you have to have a firm hand on here, loosen the clutch, and then move the counterweight around, because now the counterweight's way too heavy. So if I move it in, right about there, we're balanced. So that's a pretty major difference just because I'm pulling the lens now in a different spot. And I also do not necessarily recommend you angle it. It's such a steep angle. See how high that is? You don't really want that. There's a better way to do it, putting less stress on the tracker. And the way you would do that is just kind of have a single line, if that makes sense. See how everything's pretty much vertical? The camera's not arcing up or backwards. Once you have everything in this straight angle, we can loosen our clutch and get up like that, just like we would do with a telephoto lens. I can loosen my panning knob, and I can still reach the different portions of the sky that I want. You don't have to do this, but sometimes it might help to just give you a more stable setup. Just keep that in mind, but you can always feel free to just do it the normal way, loosen the ball head and point wherever you need to. And that's how you'll attach and use your wide-angle lens and ball head securely with the declination bracket. Now, when I was teaching people, most of the time they had really big, expensive ball heads that probably weighed 3 or 4 pounds, and a big full-frame camera, big wide-angle lens. That was always way too much weight for a single counterweight. And therefore, I recommend, if you've got a big setup, get that second counterweight for 25 bucks. You can attach 2 at the same time, and that'll allow you to have a balanced setup, even with a big ball head, big lens, and all that. But that's how I would do things for a wide-angle lens. And that's about all I have for you in today's video on the SkyGuider Pro. We covered the basics from how to actually attach everything properly, how to do a rough polar alignment to get sharp stars even after 4 minutes. We also talked about using the wedge here, or the alt as base, and quite a bit more. However, just like everything in astrophotography, you'll always have more to learn. And that's why I created my full SkyGuider Pro course, which has over 15 hours of tutorial videos at this point. And that's where I'm going to walk you through how to plan your Milky Way photo shoots, how to choose the best camera gear, which camera settings are going to work best, whether you're shooting wide angle or some telephoto work, how to set this up when you get on location and take your photos. That's going to be key. And then most importantly, once you've gotten your images, you need to know how to process them. Because when you have a star tracker, you're going to be taking one image of the sky where the tracker's turned on, then you're going to turn off the tracker and take another exposure for the foreground. Because remember, whenever this tracker's turned on, the foreground is going to blur out and the stars will be sharp. When the tracker's turned off, the foreground will be sharp, but the stars will blur out. And I cover multiple different ways to blend in the post-processing course, whether you have a really advanced and detailed horizon with a lot of trees, or just a very simple one with just maybe an arch. We're going to look at different ways to blend, and that's going to save you a lot of time and headaches once you know that process. We'll also look at how I edit my own nightscape images and a whole lot more. But if you're more interested in deep space astrophotography with a telephoto lens, in that case, I'd recommend my Deep Space course, which has, again, over 15 hours of completely separate tutorial videos. And we're going to walk through, at this point, 12 of my favorite objects, including the Lagoon Nebula, the Whirlpool Galaxy, the Orion Nebula, Andromeda, and a whole lot more. And the whole focus of that course is using a telephoto lens to capture amazing images, something like you might see in the astrophotography magazines. And it's really remarkable what you can capture with your DSLR, a telephoto lens, and your tracker. So I recommend checking that out if you're interested. And that's about all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have a question, leave a comment. Be sure to answer it. But again, if you do have questions, definitely check out the courses. They're going to cover pretty much everything you could possibly need to know. And I'll catch you in the next video.